We are tired of dealing with this in you. Why can't you be like your brother? We are tired of dealing with your nonsense. First, you got depressed, and then you isolated yourself. You withdrew. You went no contact, and now your other siblings. Look at what you've done to your other siblings. Have you thought about it? And look what you've done to your parents. How dare you? How dare you go no contact? And you're back here for what reason? Life was okay without you. When you decided to leave, we decided to move on. So how dare you come back into our lives after you've created so many problems that we have? That was something one of my clients dealt with right in the middle of a session. About 8 years ago, I had a young lady who came into therapy to deal with the consequences of going no contact with her family. She was dealing with what some people call family scapegoating abuse or family scapegoating syndrome. Man, that's a lot to say. And what happened to her was pretty sad because she left the family and went no contact because she felt unloved. She felt manipulated. She felt nobody was listening to her. And she also found herself in the middle of a lot of family disagreements and challenges and couldn't find her way out. She knew that once she left the family, there was a chance she'd want to come back and they would not accept her. She left the family because her brother sexually and psychologically manipulated her and harmed her. She didn't know whether she was going to live or die most of the time because he did threaten her with homicide, once he would offend her or negatively impact her in some way. Intimidation was big. And so, she felt like at that time, and I know you guys have most likely felt this way as well, she felt that nobody would believe her, nobody would understand her, and she was right. She knew her family. She knew that they were not going to look at her and console her. And she became kind of like this sacrificial lamb of the family. And so all of their problems and all of their devilish attitudes and dispositions and all of their biases and discriminations and prejudices and all of their, deep-seated emotional problems were all passed on to her. In a sense, she became a sacrificial lamb. We actually call this in psychology projection of the shadow. Projection of the shadow is when somebody projects onto you one's own negative and undesirable traits. And that is the shadow. They project onto you their own negative and undesirable traits. And they do that to avoid having to look within. If you can take the consequences of having these thoughts, feelings, behaviors, attitudes, political beliefs, the list goes on, then it kind of frees me from having to look within myself and say, that's a really ugly side of you. It's easier if I could just place it onto you. So projection of the shadow is a way that most family members get, they kind of get out of having to take responsibility for their own negative behaviors and undesirable emotions and attitudes. You become the designated person within the family, and the designated person becomes the black sheep. They become the scapegoat. The person deflects through blame, and they blame you, right? And they make you what we call the blamed out group. You're over there with those people. You're not the in group. Now, the in group would be maybe your dad, maybe your mom, maybe your brother, maybe your grandparents, and they all have a similar way that they see life. Maybe they also have the same belief systems, the same attitudes, the same things that they are projecting on to you. That family dynamic between them entails that same thing, but maybe they don't want to own it, right? Because they know something's wrong with it. So instead of them owning that, they project it onto you. You become the blamed out group. And that is a way for them to maintain those ugly desires, ways of thinking, behaviors. And again, they make it your problem. Now here you are as this sacrificial lamb where everybody places all their negatives upon you. The Hebrew term for scapegoat is the Day of Atonement. Have you ever heard of that before? It's Day of Atonement. That is literally what the Hebrew term of scapegoating really is. It's interesting, right? There's also some biblical pieces to this term. If you think about the book of Leviticus, there is this scapegoat syndrome that kind of comes about, if you will. And the Christian Bible, I will refer to it as, has in the book of Leviticus, the story of the Israelites, and they really take all of their sins and they place it upon this goat. And once they place all their sins and burdens and all of that onto the goat, then they are now free. And so now they can go and live in the way that God wants them to live, because they don't have to deal with all those things that they held on the inside of them. And so in a sense, that goat was the sacrificial lamb, and that's how they dealt with their sin and their guilt and their disappointments of themselves. Now, if we talk about scapegoat syndrome, it really is a layman term that people have come up with to describe a series of common behaviors that kind of looks like a syndrome. Here's the definition of a syndrome on the screen. As you can see, it's the result of a variety of symptoms and behaviors that occur together, and they occur in a particular order or in a particular way. And so this is really why, laymen have come up with the idea and the term of scapegoating syndrome, because they feel like there's a series of behaviors that goes along with this particular behavior. Maybe you don't feel like you should be the black sheep of the family, but you've had no say in that because everybody around you has decided to label you as that. And so it's hard to kind of push labels off of you that family have given you. And after the label has spread around in your family, it's even more difficult to come out from among that. Now, here's what's interesting. When there's a dysfunctional family, the scapegoat kind of takes a hit, and that hit is an unfair one in order to maintain the dysfunctional equilibrium that's in the family. And I'm kind of laughing here because you may be wondering, well, wait a minute, isn't equilibrium balance? But in a dysfunctional family, what do you think is balance within the family? The instability in and of itself, right? Think about families who fight all the time. They disagree. They call each other names. They curse at each other. They make statements that are not pleasant. They have this rough, aggressive way about themselves, even some passive aggressive behaviors. It's an unspoken language in some families. So this unspoken language of anger and hostility and passive aggressiveness, in a sense, once you get used to that on a continual basis, it becomes a pattern, right? Things as usual. And even though it's dysfunctional, it's things as usual. Keeping that title is the equilibrium within the family. Nobody else can be the scapegoat, the black sheep, but you. If you feel like this is something that has significantly impacted you, and you find yourself unable to get rid of the label, you find yourself feeling guilt, you feel impacted negatively and emotionally by this, then you definitely want to keep on watching. I found a scapegoat in my own family. To be very honest, I do believe my mother in her younger years was the scapegoat of the family, the black sheep. My mom would not take anybody's cotton candy, if you will. She didn't want to be manipulated or ran over. She had this bad to the bone kind of a disposition at times. But then she was also highly emotional and reactive. And I think that kind of led my mom down a road where people kind of saw her as the emotional one, the exaggerative one at certain times, the one who doesn't go with the flow. She's non-agreeable. She's very critical of other people. She dissects things to its core. She judges and criticizes. And while she was that way being younger, she's completely shifted as she's gotten older. But I think my mom had a label of the black sheep, not only because of her own doing, but also just because of that's where the family kind of placed her. It really does impact not only your own self-esteem, but it impacts how other people around you see you. So An example of this could be, let's say your mom and dad has really painted you as the identified patient, the designated person. They are going through a process of projecting of the shadows, right? So they're placing all of their negative things that they don't want onto you. Now, let's say, like my mother, you've grown over the years, you've been humbled, you've been taught some things, you've had some trauma, you're doing things a little bit differently. You've had your own children, you've raised children, you're starting to see things in more of a mature light. So let's say you shift and you change. That's a wonderful thing, right? But unfortunately, people in the family who have, been taught that you are not this innocent person, that you're the black sheep, you're the scapegoat, they're going to hold you to that. And it's going to be really difficult for you to undo their vision of you. Their perception of you is distorted. And it's going to take some time, maybe even a lifetime, to get them to see you differently. And unfortunately, it impacts not only the way that extended family members treat you, but it also impacts how you treat yourself, right? Now, in families that are dysfunctional, you may not be able to see that your other siblings and some extended family members believe that you are the black sheep because they are also the black sheep. Right? Like sometimes you're not the only black sheep within the family. You're just one of 5, or you're one of 12 different ones in the family. And that's an even more depressing piece, right? Because somebody is going around the family naming people the black sheep. And who is this person? Are they really the problem? Are they overly critical and judgmental? What's going on with that other person that's spreading around in the family that there's these black sheep? So what are some of the common behaviors here? Here are the challenges. Psychology that focuses on family dynamics and scapegoating. It is found that in these families, there's constant criticism. There's deflection of blame. There is, you're the narcissist. I'm not the narcissist. You're the narcissist. You're such a narcissist, right? You're a sociopath. So things kind of get twisted here. They are not the problem. You are. And so you get tagged the narcissist. You get tagged the borderline. You get tagged the sociopath, right? There's also, this strong attempt of some of your family members to make you the identified patient. No matter how many times you've been successful, no matter how many times you've proven otherwise, you remain the object of concern within the family. And you may get things like, we're highly concerned about you. Or you may get things like, I think it's time for you to go seek out help. You need therapy. And that may not be the case. It might be. And if it is, so be it. You need to go do it. But the other piece of this is you really can't trust that that's really what's going on in a family where there's tons of deflection. You may also hear things like, you were just like your father, or you were just like your mother, and she has always behaved this way. So you are likely to really struggle with challenging the culture of the family, challenging the dynamic, asking questions, and feeling your own emotions. Right? So you may not be able to do any of those. Challenge the culture, the structure of the family, the dynamic. Talk about your feelings or your thoughts, right? And you're not allowed to ask questions because that's the family dynamic. And in some cultural families where there is strong Native American heritage, there is strong African heritage, right? Or there is strong Hispanic heritage, you really are not allowed to ask questions because that is not your place. There's also projection of unfair blame, right? Maybe they have been blamed somewhere and they feel like it's unfair. They're going to project that onto you, right? They use scapegoating often to minimize guilt. There is also patterns of relationship violence, repeated patterns of relationship violence. Relationship violence, coercive control, traumatic bonding, codependency, taking over of your mind in a sense, domestic violence, sibling abuse, transference of responsibility. Here you go. Here's all my responsibilities. Hope you make it. You be the parent, parentification. You're going to be on my side, not your dad's side. You're going to be on my side and not your mother's side, parental alienation. I am the rescuer, you're the problem. And you need to stop blaming mom, right? Triangulation. These unstable parts of character within family members can keep you locked into that scapegoat mentality. for a very long time. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about how this impacts you, okay? Because this really impacts you over time. The first way that it impacts you, and this is backed up by research, is you are kind of groomed over time to become the problem. You're groomed. Here's the definition of grooming on the screen. And while it may not always be in this form, right? There's not always this sexual grooming. There's not always this paraphilic grooming. There's not always this grooming to get to you in a way that isn't appropriate. But sometimes grooming is the simple act of telling you that you are the black sheep over and over and over and over again, and putting you in that position and labeling you and telling everybody else this is who you are. In a sense, they are grooming you into the mold of being the black sheep, and you kind of automatically fall into that. You suffer from trapped emotions. Emotions are trapped on the inside. Because being in the black sheep role, nobody really cares about your thoughts and feelings, right? They just want you to shut up and deal with the label that they've given you. And so you have trapped emotions. You may also have maladaptive coping skills. You don't know how to cope. It's just something you never learned. So tons of marijuana gets smoked. Mushrooms get played around with, right? Psychedelic drugs. Alcohol. Now you're addicted to alcohol. You're basically a functional alcoholic. Depressed and anxious, right? You may even feel like you've had complex PTSD. That's never been looked at or considered. Maybe you like to get your emotions out by picking fights with people in society, driving really fast on the highway and around people, causing them fear, right? Somewhere that may give you power, because that's the only power you have. So maladaptive coping skills. There's also this distorted view of roles within your family, a distorted view of roles within your family. You are not this role. You are not that role. Here's the role that you really are. And that's the black sheep and the scapegoat and the troublemaker and, you know, the one who's always dissatisfied and non-agreeable. So you kind of develop this distorted view of your role within the family. There's emotional distress. There's a lack of emotional safety, right? There's addiction that can also impact you in some ways. You don't really know who you are, so there's a loss of identity. There's also this normalization of dysfunction. Remember earlier, I said that can be equilibrium for some people living in very dysfunctional dynamics, but it's kind of how the family goes along, right? And so in a lot of ways, you can normalize dysfunction over time. You can take that dysfunction from family and move it into your work situation and move it into your marriage and move it into your relationship with your siblings at the adult level. And it kind of normalizes and perpetuates this dysfunction. You may also have a sense of false safety and healing. Now, you may be wondering, what does that mean? Here's what it means. Maybe you think you've healed, right? Because you've gotten older and you've moved on, and maybe you think you're dealing with it. But the reality is this, for most people, you've only internalized it. And so you walk around in the mentality of victimization. You may walk around feeling like everybody does things to me that's not right, and I can't take this life anymore. Suicidal thoughts can come up because of that. Some people who engage in homicidal behaviors have also felt that way. Those who feel like they just want to harm other people in society, they're displacing their anger and their hurt feelings onto other things, right? There's a lot of false healing that can go on when it comes to the black sheep. And sometimes they believe, okay, that was me as a child. I'm better as an adult. The reality is you really have to work through living in that label of being the black sheep, because it becomes a part of who you are. There's also this attitude of, it's okay if I'm exploited. I know that this relationship is not everything that I want, but it's some of what I want. And so I'm going to put up with it, right? This is not the job role that I deserve, but I'm just going to go ahead and deal with it because at least I have a job. I know that he is not giving me everything that I want and deserve as a woman, as a person, as a mother of his children, but I'm going to go along with it because I don't want to be alone. So it's kind of like you're giving everybody else permission to exploit you, right? There's also this interesting way, and this is backed by research as well, that we kind of normalize domestic violence and relationship trauma. We've been so used to it, and I say we to be inclusive, but you can become so used to domestic violence and relationship trauma that you minimize it, you internalize the pain, and you move along in life like everything is okay, like everything is stable, like everything is a-okay, and that is not the reality of that. In a sense, it tells you a lot about you because you've become very comfortable with living a lie. You've become so comfortable in living the label of the black sheep that you may begin to develop in other areas of your life some black sheep behaviors that isn't a positive thing, right? I'm going to deal with him beating me. I'm going to deal with her having an affair on me. I'm going to just be okay with doing drugs every day. I'm going to be okay with having all this alcohol on the weekend and vomiting and being unable to live life in a healthy way. You kind of over time take on that role of dysfunctional. We can talk more about this live on Friday and Saturday. Come join me then. We're going to talk more about how to navigate this a little bit and how to psychoanalyze yourself. You're going to want to see it. I hope to see you then. Bye-bye.